of course, as y'all know, being 120 years old and trying to decide your future, the course of your new life, you know, you think about, well, you know, the plans that I had, the ideas of where I was going to work, how things unfolded. I pretty much built and spent the money accordingly. And it's so funny, if I would have known how things was going to work out, I think, you know, well, I would like to think that I would have done things differently, but, you know, I don't know. I don't understand God's ways and plans. You know, Scripture specific. It says, you know, my ways are not your ways, my thoughts are not your thoughts. Well, you know, if that's being the case, and I know that it is, but the problem is that how we have thoughts, we tend to think that our thoughts line up with God's thoughts. And most of the time they don't, sometimes they do. And so I know that I am trying to make the best decision now for my family. I know that I am operating on, how would I say this, limited time. That's the best way I can say it. Because it's like I was telling Carrie this morning, you know, I cleaned up the fence row yesterday and other little things, and got the church mowed and weeded and all that junk. And I asked myself, how did I get this stuff done back when I was doing everything else? And Amber had answered it a long time ago. She said, well, you just didn't. Well, you know, to a certain degree I did, but what I did do is I had to kill myself to accomplish it. I remember back on Huddle Street when we was there, I had this little epiphany that, well, you know, if I will spend an hour, hour and a half every day working through the yard, at the end of the week, I mean, that's almost 8 hours. And so that would put me 8 hours ahead on Saturday. And so then, because traditionally for the last, I don't know, however, I really had one day off. And so when you put something else in that draws from your time reservoir, you know, you sit there and you think, well, how much do you really need? Well, you know, and I look back now and I'm thinking, well, okay, well, you got this accomplished. Well, you know, as I get older, the body does not respond like it used to. Huh, Michael? And, you know, you start looking at, you know, it's like Amber, she's made a comment so many times. She says, well, you know, our house, we got a smaller house, but it takes longer to clean it. Why does a smaller house take longer to clean it? Well, you know, either A, David, you're more particular, B, well, we're just older. Either way, we're functioning on a limited time set. And it's like what we've talked about with the yard. I have to be considerate about the yard. Anything that I plant now, I have to be considerate because, you know, eventually, 18 years from now, I'll be 80. Doesn't seem like that long. You know, by the time my grandchildren are considered marrying David, I'll be that age. You know, and you just kind of think about that. You're like, dang. Well, you know, how do I want to set my world up? How do I want to set my life up? You know, and we've talked about retirement plans and different things and how we've blown this or how we've blown that. Good morning.
Good morning.
And how we've done these things wrong, or, you know, and honestly, a man can honestly sit back and look at his life. You ever wondered why Satan, of all the things that he's called the what?
Accuser.
The accuser. You know, so you're sitting there and you're accusing them, Amber, of everything that you've done wrong. Well, you know, as I've said it before, AJ, he's not going to accuse us of being bank robbers. You know, and why not? Because we're not bank robbers. Carrie, he's not going to accuse you of being a bad mom, because you is not a bad mom, and you're not a bad mom. He's not going to accuse you of things that has no meaning in your life. But what is he going to accuse you of? The things that you've done wrong, the things that you failed in. And that's what he's going to just overload you. You know, one of the great things that I consider that I failed at and this is my opinion, is getting my wife set up for her life. And so, I foolishly have thought this thing. Well, if I will be so stupidly stubborn that I will outlive my wife, at least that way, what kind of plan is that? That I'm personally going to outlive my wife, So, again, here's Monty making his foolish plan. So then what can I do? What are the things that I can do? Well, I can start putting myself more in line with God. So, why did we create an unofficial starting time? Because we started forming disciplines. David, what time do you have to be at work? 8. That's negotiable.
That's supposed to be.
But the thing is that, it's like when I was at Custom Auto, I left at 4 o'clock. Did I feel guilty about it? Well, a lot of times I felt guilty of it. Lance, the thing is that was the deal that I negotiated. I said, if I'm coming, I'm leaving at 4 o'clock. I knew that caused friction. Didn't know how much, but the thing is that again, that's part of the deal that I made. We make deals, we make adjustments. But the thing is that there are things that there are no negotiating with. There are things that God said is this right here. Lance, if you've got a big pour, you've got everybody set up for that pour. You've got a crew that's there for that pour. And you are sitting there and you've got the people, everything ready, but the truck company that's hauling your cement decide, I know we said 3 o'clock, but this morning, but I've got a couple of guys that, didn't show up today, and one of my really good customers needs his concrete more than yours. Worse yet, what would happen if you're right in the middle of the pour, and all of a sudden guys say, well, sorry, Lance, I can't give you no more concrete. Well, why? Well, my driver got sick, or he had a birthday or something like that, he took off, and again, where would that put you at? That would be a what? A great inconvenience, wouldn't it? So the thing is that these are things that we have to look at things and start evaluating our lives and saying, okay, because again, if you're consistently late going to work, or you're consistently not showing up for work, or you're doing these things, honestly, AJ, if you've got a guy that every time he comes in, you tell him something to do, he badmouths you, how long is he going to work? And when is he going to get a raise? Never. So the thing is that until this person fixes their attitude, they're going to have what? So all that being said, how do you work with somebody like this? How do you deal with these? So myself, I'm looking at, okay, what are things that I know that I can do differently? One of the areas that, as I've said, I'm at this point of wearing, okay, the jobs that I knew that in my mind that I had really believed that these things was going to pan out, have not panned out. And so I find myself saying, okay, God, because, I'm flesh. I need to see a course. I need some course. I need to see, David, I'm not good at drifting. I'm hopeless at drifting because just not, we'll see what comes about today. I'm just not, I don't know how y'all be, but I'm not good at this. So, I have to ask myself first and foremost, am I in God's will? In other words, consider a mirror. A mirror reflects what you look like. But there are spirituality mirrors as well. There are spirituality mirrors that you hold up and they reflect. Because in reality, when you look in a mirror, is that truly what you look like?
Dang right it is.
No, it's not.
They say it's not.
It is not. The mirror is not, because it is not three-dimensional.
Oh, I got you.
Shut up. the thing is that, yes, truly, it is three-dimensional, but as well, the thing is that you may think that you look a certain way. How many times have you walked in and you've looked and somebody says, "Hello, sexy."
Oh,
I doubt it. It's just very
They
subtle.
say that.
They say, "Are you okay?"
Yeah.
Well,
Oh, yeah.
Why? Because you're radiating something that you didn't see in the mirror. Has anybody ever worked in telemarketing sales or anything like that?
Negatory ghostwriter.
Okay. Has anybody ever worked in sales?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. What is one of the things that they teach you early in sales to do?
Smile.
If you're going to
Huh?
Smile.
Smile. How?
very careful.
Teeth.
Did you know that honestly they teach you to hold a mirror up? If you're ever walking into an appointment, you're walking to see somebody, you hold this mirror up and you smile into this mirror. You seeing yourself smiling will set the pace for your mind. And if you can't smile at yourself honestly, then what happens is that you have to say, well, why am I not happy? Because the thing is, if you're in sales, you've got to project that image. And so they tell you to smile, to see yourself. And that changes. I can't tell you how many times I've used it. That's one of the most powerful things in sales that I've ever had, because it forces you to do it. And so like you said, David, in telemarketing, I would have a mirror and I would look at this mirror and I'd smile before I answer the phone every time. Why? Because what happened is that honestly, when you don't smile, Customado, Burger King,
They can hear it through the phone.
they can hear
Or
it.
through the headset.
Yes. I remember when we was in Fayetteville, a lady was checking us out, and I hated Fayetteville. Hated it. Because there's some of the rudest people in the world. They've moved to Conway now. But the thing is that I even asked this woman one time, I said, ma'am, I said, are you this unhappy? Or is there something I've done? Or are you just this rude to everybody? She looked at me like, because again, that's just their whole, and they're in sales, they're checking you out, and you're just like, and so that was always a thing that, well, I would call I was trained as a young person, whenever somebody would call, like when I worked at Newberry's, they would talk about how you answer the phone, how you talk to the customer, and you'd always say, hey, this is Monty, someone says, they say as an example, Bell Chevrolet parts, something like or they'll short it parts. And so when you get parts, you say, yeah, this is Monty at Custom Auto. Yeah. And I'm always like, I would always pause because I'm like, and I say, well, are we having a bad day? Why? Because again, it's this air that you're putting out. It's this aura. The thing is that we have the ability to a certain degree to affect our world. In other words, make changes within our world to steer our world. So as an example, if you are in a relationship, we've talked about this, and that you're struggling with, and you're with this person that, and you find yourself arguing with this person a lot or whatever, well, have you ever considered maybe stop arguing and stop picking their faults? Stop focusing on their faults. When we look into this environment that we're constantly doing these things, the Bible talks about that if we would spend more time looking at ourselves than we do looking at others, we would find that the faults in others are less than the faults that we perceive in ourselves. So now we're moving into an area of disciplining ourselves. So what does the Bible say? I think it's Hebrews 12:6. I didn't write them all down. What does the Bible say about disciplining? Somebody read that.
Because the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and he chastens everyone he accepts as his son. That's NIV.
Okay, so he disciplines. In other words, he puts boundaries around them, and he chastens them. In other words, if you screw up, what does he do?
Correct.
So the thing is, if you really consider that, because everybody tells you that God loves everybody, right? but he just tells you that he disciplines those that he loves. Now that kind of brings into a whole new thing, because why are we getting off into discipline? The thing is that when we're moving down this road right here, understand something. I feel that God has been communicating to us and actually showing us that he wants to talk to us. I've always struggled prior to this length of time that we've been studying this. I've always struggled. I remember even going to my pastor saying, I'm just waiting on God to talk to me, waiting on God to reveal himself. Well, the thing is that God, I've now discovered that God is more ready to reveal himself than we are to receive God. And why do we not want God? It's Brad, right? Brad, why do we really not want God in our life?
No reason.
Huh?
There ain't no reason not to have him.
Well, think about it, because when God is in our life, why do we not want a schedule? Why do we want to be just free?
Because then we can do what we want.
Because when we start dealing with God, every time I find that we start dealing with God and getting God in our life, you ever notice that God will bring things up?
Sure does.
He will say, hey, I felt guilty. I always pick on Artie. And so I've really been convicted about picking on Artie. I still wrestle with it, but I'm better about my snide remarks to Artie. I had felt guilty about picking on Lance, and so I've learned to leave Lance alone. I try, some of you I'll talk to, some of you I'll not really say, I'll be greetings and stuff like that, but I'll try not to point you out, because I can usually tell you're dealing with things. And so the last thing I want to do is pick on that dealing. It's easy to do. It's easy to tell you're dealing on things and start doing